I thought I'd talk about a few things. One is what are my responsibilities as executive director, so you know what to come to me for and what not. I thought I'd also, just given the conversation here, recap some of the reasons why the MGHPCC is here as a level that I thought that would be of interest. Also, actually Bill Messner a couple of weeks ago asked me, I guess you're in the habit of asking hard questions. I still don't have a perfect answer to what's going on in the center, but I thought I'd start on that answer a little bit. And if there's time, we'll also talk about what our short-term timeline is, so you get a sense for what will happen down on Bigelow Street and in the environs over the next little while. So the executive director really has three tasks that are related and significant. One is to build a data center that delivers cycles to faculty researchers at these 5 institutions, computing cycles, so that they can do research that wasn't possible before. Dovetailing with that, we're making a conscious effort, and this is an important part of the vision of the presidents of the university, and actually the governor as well as Cisco and EMC, which is to catalyze collaboration among the universities, again, to do projects that are now too big for one university to do alone. So when MIT and Harvard and UMass, which are all pretty weighty institutions, for example, on their own, start to encounter scientific problems that are really too big for them to deal with, you know that we're in a different world and a pretty exciting one. The third leg of this is being the representative of the center as really a new member of this community, and I'll put an emphasis on new. There's a lot for us to learn. You will see many other people from the center, from MGHPCC, and from the universities in the community over time, but I am the one person that you can always call if something's going wrong, or maybe even if something's going right, that's okay too, or if you just have a question. So those are the three things that I'm on the hook to do, and pretty excited about doing. As a business entity, in some sense, with a small profit margin of zero, but basically a business entity locating here in Holyoke, there were a number of things that drove us, and John Doyle actually was very articulate about a few of them. I thought I'd add a few more. So first and foremost, inexpensive green power. Glad that Jim Lavelle is not here, because that means he's making our power less expensive and greener and working on that transformer. In addition to that, an almost hidden asset, which is, as I guess many of you know, Chicopee is a fiber hub. High performance computing for scientists involves enormous amounts of data. There are people in our community who literally collect a terabyte a day. A terabyte, just to put it in perspective, is about as much data as I will accumulate in my entire lifetime. So transporting that data from Boston to Holyoke can take a really long time if you don't have the communication capacity. In fact, in this case, we have two things. One is literally we will have dedicated fiber links from every university to the center, which is huge and not possible in Lowell, for example. And not possible in many places outside, and impossible expense-wise for someplace in, say, Oregon or some other part of the country. In addition, there are data sets that are so big that, in fact, the appropriate method of transport is Peter Pan, the bus line, not the character. So literally, you put a collection of disk drives on the bus, and it takes less time to drive them out here than it does to take out over the so being local is actually logistically important to us as well. There's two other factors that haven't been mentioned. One is Holyoke is actually a good place to do business, and you shouldn't forget that part of it. Kathy and Tim, Jim Lavelle, the mayor, any number of people have worked to solve problems as they come up in ways that are creative, engaging, and clearly make it clear that you want us here, and that actually makes a huge difference. I should also mention that Eric Pat, Secretary Bilecki, and the governor are very persuasive advocates for locating here as well. And that counts, again, in a couple of ways. As you know, there is a grant involved, which helps a lot. But also as problem solvers, that's, I would almost say, equally important here as we're sorting through how to locate in a community, and something that has meant a lot in this process. So that's why we're here. What are we trying to accomplish? So I don't have time to talk about exactly what goes on inside, but I thought I'd make just a couple of points about what comes out. We've talked about the knowledge corridor. I think somebody defined the corridor a moment ago. Tim did. So I'll take a crack at defining knowledge, right? So universities are in the business of creating knowledge, and this center is a tool that will be creating knowledge. So what does that mean? I'll give 3 examples. The University of Massachusetts last year, just to give you a sense for the value of knowledge, generated, I think, $70 million in licensing revenues, roughly speaking. I think that Jeff is gone. That was the number he gave me. So if you think about $70 million in licensing revenues to companies that are in business to make a profit, that's about $700 million or more worth of economic activity. Pretty powerful stuff, right? And the knowledge. So that's one way to think about how you value the stuff that comes out of this center. Another way to think about the value of it is actually my own personal experience, which in fact reads like an economic development textbook, I think, for Massachusetts. I came here from out of state to go to school. I got educated, so there's an important product there, which is educated people who come into this workforce. I got involved in a research project that had mostly federal funding, but it was a prototype for something that about 15 years later, and this actually frustrates our political folks, they'd like it to happen more in like 2 days as opposed to 15 years, but it turned into the internet, right? Pretty big deal. Born to a large extent here in Massachusetts as a result of university research that had been done in the 60s, right? So think about that gestation period and the kind of investment. Wound up being part of a startup company that was the first acquisition by Cisco Systems in Massachusetts. That little 60-person group back in 1995 has now grown into a 2,200-person R&D facility in Boxborough, which is not quite western Massachusetts, but it is on the western side of 495. A pretty big deal. I think, there's a couple of points there. One is, and it wasn't me single-handedly, trust me, but injecting people into the economy, keeping them here, generates huge rewards over time for the state. And I think that's a big part of what the universities are about in this context. Later on, I'll talk about kind of what's inside the center, actually in 2 weeks in Springfield when I have a slightly larger window. But that's the kind of thing that the universities are looking to do better by placing this facility in Holyoke. Let me now get a little more concrete. We've been at this for longer than HDR, so we have maybe more to talk about on the ground. As you probably all know, we've had architects actually on retainer for quite some time. They've been looking at building concepts. We've selected a site, broken ground, as you know. There's been this very long process, therefore, of just getting started. Finding the money was a pretty big deal. We're entering a new phase about now. The next phase will have 2 pieces to it. One is preparing the site for the building. That will involve actually taking down the Mastex building as well as the Butler building. There's some good history on that site. There's some less good history involving PCBs and so forth that we'll take out and make sure that the site is clean both to the state standards and to our standards. In parallel with that, we'll be doing the detailed design of the facility, which actually takes quite a long time. And it'll be a collaborative effort between our architects, M&W, as well as our construction manager, Turner Construction, as well as a lot of people inside of the consortium. If all goes well, actually if all goes really well, speaking to our partners at MDFA, that'll be done in the early spring. Our current projection actually is that will happen, will be complete somewhere in the middle of the year. So we're working on when that might happen, but it's a pretty lengthy process. Following that, we'll start building, and the building will take us through around the end of 2012. So it's a long process in and of itself. And once we've built, we'll roll up with modest-sized tractor trailers filled with computers and roll them and get going and start doing research. So that's the rough timeline for the physical piece of this project. There's also a part of the project, again, which is us starting to become a member of the community. There are a few people who have already been doing groundwork. Jim Carosi from the University of Massachusetts, whom you know, ran a workshop last spring with a collection of community leaders, people from UMass and other parts of the consortium, which was much like what our friends at HER have been talking about, which is, so what does it mean to have this center here? How can we work together? What assets do the universities have as part of, for example, their community-oriented mission that can help make Holyoke and the Pioneer Valley be a stronger place? Working, I think, in particular in concert with HCC and STC as kind of educational collaborators. Jeff Brancato is in the back of the room from UMass, but is also the government and community specialist for the consortium, has infiltrated this group and has been part of other planning groups inside the community, has worked closely with Kathy and the mayor and Tim and others, so that we have a better understanding of what's going on locally and how we play it. There are others. I think there's an NSF grant proposal out, which would involve Holyoke, both K through 12 school systems, University of Massachusetts, Boston University as well, all 5 universities, sorry. So that's an example of, kind of a trial. Sorry about that. Sure, I turned that off. Sorry. Not being Rudy Giuliani, I will not answer it. So that's an example of kind of an initial collaboration, a bit of a practice run on how we might work together to build, again, in the education space, some collaborative projects. So that's what's on the ground today and beginning to happen.